Welcome. I'm Doug Piper, and I'm a halftime alumni from Greenville, South Carolina. This is our 42nd live streaming event, and I want you to know how much I appreciate your taking a few minutes of time this morning to join us and just be energized and hear some great things because Halftime is the world's leading peer learning center for successful people who are in transition. We teach, coach, and connect leaders who are looking for more meaning, joy, and impact in their next season. Now, on that same vein, we have some virtual roundtable opportunities coming up. And so please click on the link there in the bottom center of the screen, and that will email Lloyd, and you can tell him what you're interested in. We also have an option for an event at Scott River Gorge. So if you're interested in that, after hearing Lloyd and Steve talk about some of the things that are going on at JH Ranch, please click on there and tell them you're interested in learning more. Now, life has many transitions, and maybe one of the most important is our transitioning role in our family. You know, our kids are possibly no longer within our home, but we still want to grow a thriving family. But intuitively, we sense that we're moving from coach maybe to just a consultant. So, what should we stop doing? And maybe what should we start doing? Maybe what helpful models could guide our vision for our new role as empty nest parents? Well, today we're joined by halftime alumni Steve Siefert, and he's been guiding families through this journey at JH Ranch for over 4 years. And this was after his moving from Edward Jones to really follow his passion. He fell in love with JH Ranch and took his son and daughter there. They deepened their relationship not only with each other, but with God. And so have 40,000 other moms and dads. So now how does JH help teach kids and parents what to avoid what they had to learn the hard way? Well, Steve's had experience at helping scores of families make this exact transition. So let's hear Steve's wisdom on parenting as empty nesters. Well, gentlemen, I hope we can get everything up here on screen, and it looks like we have. So Steve has his BS in finance from Milken University and the Kellogg Management Institute. He was general principal at Edward Jones, married 32 years with 2 adult children, and he's now the director of the JH Ranch Everlasting Adventures. We also have Lloyd Reeb, a successful real estate developer, author of 3 books, and the founding partner of Halftime. Now, Lloyd, it was great gathering with you and Linda in your home with the other Halftime leadership earlier this month. And I remember hearing you say many times as we talked about this program that empty nest parenting is consistently a reoccurring topic with alumni. And I'd love to hear you share a little bit more on how those conversations go.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for leading us and for your friendship. And yeah, it was a joy. We had 20 some people at our home, all halftime alumni that live in our community. And halftime's a journey. It's a journey among friends. We need each other, and we're inspired by each other. And so that's a wonderful thing. And there probably, if you're an alumni in a market, there's probably dozens of other halftime alumni right near you. Steve and I built a friendship 10 years ago when we got to know each other and in his journey at halftime. And I had the privilege of being a guide along the way with him and learning from him at the same time. And today he and his wife and Linda and I, we co-facilitate 2 weeks in the fall at a beautiful Scott River Lodge that Steve runs as part of the JH Ranch. But Doug, the conversation goes something like this. I've spent 20,000 hours now coaching executives on midlife renewal. And the conversation starts out, well, I'm finishing a long career at PwC, or I'm about to retire in 3 years or I'm going to sell my business, or I've been a dentist for 27 years and I'm getting tired of it. And I'm thinking about what's next. And this conversation starts with, what am I going to do? And as we start to build clarity and we do some careful thinking about the foundation of their life and what do they really want long term, then it starts to merge. Well, I guess I really should think through my financial plan, because there are pieces of it that I don't think really undergird our calling, or maybe my health needs some focus. But invariably, the topic turns to family. And they'll say, I'm discovering that there's some missing links in my parenting role now. And I used to think that, when the youngest one graduated from college, then they were off the payroll. And somehow inadvertently, I got thinking that my leadership role was done, or that I wasn't quite sure what my leadership role was in the family. And now I'm discovering that there's these new opportunities. I have a daughter-in-law, and I want to love her extravagantly, but I don't quite know where to begin, or I want to have deeper conversations. We've never really had a family vision or values, or how do I get out of being the CEO of the family, and how can I help them hear my heart? And it just bubbles out of them like that. In fact, that's a conversation you and I had, Doug, when you were in this journey, right? Because you had a challenge with one of your children, and you were trying to navigate how to love them both equally and yet differently. And Steve, I think you and I had this conversation when you were going through halftime. So to set this up, take us back, Steve, to your journey and how you fell in love with this. Don't you wish everybody could go to JH Ranch?
Absolutely. Everybody should. In a word, the experience was transformative. And, we were introduced by some friends who were introduced by their pastors. And so I did first take our son, and really not knowing exactly what to expect. I thought it'd be a great opportunity for he and I to connect and have some fun. And little did I know the impact that it would have on our family, even now, 10 plus years later. So, I was blessed to spend almost 30 years at Edward Jones. We were in NR, just a phenomenal company, great group of people, client focused. From a worldly perspective, life was really, really good. There were always challenges. All families face challenges of various sorts. But for whatever reason, for me, we were certainly dealing with some challenges with our son. He had a lot of energy, even at that time. He was between his 8th grade and freshman year when I took him to the ranch. But for me, there was an unsettledness. So even though from a worldly perspective, life looked great, would say near perfect, there was, my word, an unsettledness to life for me. And in many ways was caught up in the pursuit of more very performance-driven. And that, I won't say it all changed after attending JH, but certainly that experience helped to realign our priorities and refocus. Certainly for me, it took me from religion to a relationship with Christ. That was the number one thing that I certainly wasn't expecting when I went to the ranch. I expected some improvement between my horizontal relationship with my son, with our daughter, with my wife, but I didn't expect that vertical relationship to be strengthened, and I certainly came away with that. And it helped to provide a foundation for us as a family from which we then ultimately built our family upon. And it helped me to recognize my role as a parent, given the stage of life that we were in with our kids. So at JH Ranch, we talk about moving from a caretaker to a cop, to a coach, to a consultant. And I was probably doing a lot of copping at the time. Thankfully, we've moved past that stage. Really, that's one of the things I think we want to talk about here today is as you transition to being a consultant, there's tremendous joy in that. But there's also challenges even with that if we don't approach it the right way.
Yeah. So when you chose to go to JH and be active, if you had been passive in that role, you might have missed out on
Absolutely.
The opportunity and the transformation and the impact it even had in Diana, watching you rise to the occasion in that role as dad in the family. And the same way you and I could inadvertently miss out on the opportunity if we're passive when we're empty nesters. We could abdicate our leadership responsibility in the family. So frame up for us some of the challenges you hear from the hearts and minds of executives as they, pack their SUV up to leave JH and they know their kids are gone off to college or beyond. And then what are some of the best practices that you and your team have been learning over these many years?
Yeah, and some of this, hopefully many of you tuning in had the opportunity to hear our founder, Bruce Johnston, just a month or so ago. He talked about some of these very same things, but I think oftentimes, one of the number one challenges can be when we have a child, son or daughter, whose values and beliefs don't appear to align with ours, even though we feel like we raised them in a Christian home. We feel like sometimes as parents, right, we did all the right things, but as they've grown up, as they've gone out on their own, sometimes their values and beliefs will shift and may not be reflective. The other thing is, even if they're, and we're blessed that our kids are following the Lord, both of them, but sometimes their journey may not look exactly the way you thought their journey might look. That's not the case with us, thankfully, at this point. But I know for many, many parents, we hear that, but I really envision my son or daughter doing this, or I really envision them marrying this kind of person. So we have to be careful that even though what I would consider to be the most important things, where are they at ideologically, where are they at in their relationship with Christ, those things should be priority. We can sometimes even let the lesser things, their career choice, their spouse choice, be a stumbling block if we're not careful in our relationship with them. And so I would say, one of the greatest joys, and we've only been doing this for a short time. Our youngest, we've got 2 kids, a son that's just about to be 26. He's launching a company. He's been married 4 years. He's just in a great spot. He wasn't always in a great spot. He was the one that really challenged us all through high school. He was a handful, and we weren't so sure how things were going to turn out, and we didn't have great alignment between us. Our daughter, she really almost could do no wrong. Just a wonderful child. She was her worst critic, so she was always worried about how she was doing. And some of that, I think she was feeling pressure probably from me, if I'm being honest. And I think both our son and our daughter, I think, felt that even if it wasn't spoken, there was an unspoken pressure that they felt to perform just based upon where I was at. My wife, thankfully, is a rock. She is she's one of those people who finds a way to be content in any and all seasons. She's just steady and a prayer warrior. And so all that to say, as we've moved into this phase, son married 4 years, daughter just married, graduating from college, we're excited about this season because truly, I think one of the greatest joys we have as a parent is parenting our adult children. We get to come alongside them and do life with them and be a part of their journey. And Lloyd, one of the things that you and I talked about just yesterday was, joining them on their journey and being careful not to impose our journey or our expectations of their journey on them. I don't know if you want to touch on that, but to me,
that's something that, well, first of all, you and I aren't experts, right? Doug and Steve and I are not experts at this. We're fellow journeyers, but we really care about this because it's a big part of making a great second half. So I went to see my mentor in this space, Bill Wellens, who was a founding pastor at Fellowship Bible Church and part of men's fraternity creation and raising a modern day knight. And he's a great, great guy and a grandfather of 9. And I went and spent, a weekend just listening. And he said to me, Lloyd, when you show up in the room, whether you say a word or not, you put your family under pressure because they know the way you think. They've sat through these halftime talks. They've read your books. You tell stories about the lives of people that you admire and what they do, the great things. Imagine how much pressure that is. I mean, that's just relentless. And you don't even have to say a word.
Absolutely.
He said, so you got to go out of your way to try to let them be themselves. And he said, at the end of the day, please, please, please join their journey. Don't judge their journey. And so I came home and I thought, well, I don't quite know how to do that. And so what I did, Steve, was I talked to each of our kids separately. And I said to them, I want to make a commitment to you to join your journey, not judge your journey as we go forward. And so if you ever sense I'm judging your journey, could you please, please speak up? And I sat in the front of our boat one day and the kids were swimming off the back with my daughter-in-law. And I said, Shanna, what does it look like to join your journey, not judge your journey? You know, it's not passive. Joining someone's journey doesn't mean you don't ever say anything. You're oblivious. I mean, that's just abdicating. But what would it look like to join her journey and not judge her journey? And she had great insights. And one of the great things that you and I are both learning, Steve, is that we can learn from our adult kids in this season. They can guide us and teach us. And one of the best ways to get started is to ask them for advice like that. So, Shanna, how could I really join your journey, not judge your journey?
Yeah. Lloyd, I just love that. And, picking up on that, I will say one of the things that I think is extremely important at all phases, whether you're in the cop, coach, or consultant phase, is ensuring that your expectations, you and your spouse are on the same page. My wife and I oftentimes weren't exactly on the same page with regards to things like gifting to our kids. And, my wife had a tendency to want to be a lot more generous at times with our kids than what I would be. So gaining that clarity, being in agreement, extremely important. And then I think regardless, just a few other things I would mention, regardless of where your kids are at, the path they've chosen. And Bruce, for those of you that had a chance to tune in, he talked about this just a month or so ago. Regardless of where they're at, we've got to love them like Jesus does, right? We've got to love them like Jesus loves us. We've got to love them where they're at and meet them where they're at. So whether our values and ideological beliefs align, whether their journey looks the way we envisioned it might look, we've got to meet them where we're at. And then importantly, too, we've got to continue to model. So, we, just because they're no longer living in our home, make no mistake about it, they know what life looks like for us. They see how I interact with their mom, with my wife, Diana. They know that when we're spending time with the Lord each morning in our abiding time, and they know and they have a sense when we're not. So I think it's our role to model. I think it's important for those of you that have been through halftime. It's important to share with them our roadmap. So how are we approaching our relationships with our family and friends? How are we dealing with our finances? But with all of that, it's an invitation to them to be a part of it. It's not us pushing this on them. I think it's important to be welcoming of their spouses. Again, our daughter just got married, and we wanted our future son-in-law, now our son-in-law, to feel immediately welcomed into the family, and really to understand how we've navigated as a family. And I think he has a sense for, confident he does. He has a sense for some of the challenges we faced, but he has a sense for the joy and the strong relationship that we enjoy today, but knows that it wasn't always easy getting there. So he's been brought into the fold. He knows the story. He's been a part of that. He's seen some of that journey along the way. And then just two last things I would mention, Lloyd, you mentioned or alluded to, we've got to be careful not to tell them or feel compelled to tell them all we know. One of the greatest joys I had of late, in addition to seeing our daughter get married and walking her down the aisle and watching them launch life together, is our son. I alluded to the fact that he's starting a business. And he calls me one day, and we'd been talking about what he's doing, but he calls me and he says, Dad, he said, I'd really like you to be a part of this. I know you're busy. I don't know how much time you have, but if there's anything you can do to help me in this venture, I would love to tap into your experience. And to me, that was kind of the ultimate for me as a dad in this consultant phase. And admittedly, as he's moved and begun to build this company, I've had to resist the temptation at times to want to jump in. I've seen things, I'll hear him say things. And for me, it's been very, very important to take a step back and just make sure he knows that I'm here. He's welcome to ask me anything, but I'm very, very careful before imposing my thoughts and ideas on him. I'm asking for permission to do that. He's the expert in this space, not me. My 30 years of experience, I think I have something I can add, but I want to be careful that I'm not thrusting that upon him. So I'm asking for the opportunity as opposed to assuming that he wants something from me. So let me stop there. And again, would love any thoughts, Lloyd, you have on that. You've coached a lot of people in this stage of life. So.
Well, no, there's so much wisdom in that, Steve. So permission-based and it just takes on a life of its own, right? Because it's real. They know that you genuinely love them. You want to love them extravagantly. You don't feel like you have all the answers, and you respect their opinion and perspective. And when my little brother was killed in a head-on car collision a few years ago, we had to do the funeral on Zoom. And our family spread out around the world. And the morning of the funeral, I asked my son-in-law, Chris Pickens, if he would go through the script I had written to guide our family through that funeral and give me his improvements. And so thankfully he did. And he's a super smart guy walks closely with the Lord. And he made 8 changes to it, Steve.
Wow.
And we did all 8 of those changes. And I looked over at him at one point and during it, and we just made eye contact, and I realized, he's contributing so much to our family. Well, scroll forward a few years later. 2 weeks ago, we were down at Kiowa Island as a family, and it was Friday night. We were going to all leave on Saturday morning, and we were sitting in the back patio overlooking the marsh, and the sun is setting, and we've had dinner. We're drinking a glass of wine, and Chris says to me, "Hey, Dad, I got thinking. Well, first of all, when your son-in-law says, 'Hey, Dad,' isn't that bring joy to your heart?" So he said, "I've been thinking, you might benefit from learning to be more spontaneous." So then there's some eye, glancing between all the kids. And so I can tell, I think they've had this conversation before. And so then Jenny, the littlest one, she's not little, she's almost 30, but she says, "And Dad, you can't plan to be spontaneous." And so we had like an hour-long conversation, and I just said, "Tell me everything. Tell me, like, how could I do that? Like, I do have a propensity to plan." So, just so much joy in that. And at the end, they just said, "Thanks for being that we can just have this conversation," right? But where it started was not coming to Chris with smart answers, but saying to Chris, "Hey, I believe in your wisdom, and could you help me think through how to really lead my brother's funeral?"
Yeah.
So, these are things that you and I have learned from other people. No, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I just want to jump on that, because the other thing, I think, if you want to see your kids, I think regardless of whether they're high school or now you're empty nesters, but I think for us now, especially being empty nesters, adult children, they're both married, I truly believe they light up when we seek their counsel. So recognizing they are experts, they've been raised very differently than what many of us were raised, and they know a whole lot more about certain things than we know. And when you acknowledge that, like you did, Lloyd, I think that's just so powerful. And I see their face light up. I hear it when we're talking on the phone. When I say, "Hey, can you help me with this? Can I get your input on this?" Because it's recognizing them for their expertise and their experience. And then the other thing I heard you say was just being vulnerable and creating an environment where your family can be transparent. So, I can be a little anal at times, and my family has a little bit of fun with that. And it's they know that it's okay to call me out on that. And I think that's important.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've really got to be lifelong learners, and they're going to be caring for us someday. So, a couple of tactical things. One of the things that we have at the Halftime Institute is some systematic ways of having family conversations, like a sample design of a good family meeting, not about money necessarily, but could include money, but about the family values and vision, and et cetera. And we can guide you with that. A toolbox. There are so many tools you can use in your family. And do you have a toolbox of all the different things you could use, like an experience or an outside expert? My friends are an important tool in my toolbox as a parent of adult children that are 35 to 27 or 8. And so if you want, just click on that, contact Lloyd, and we'll send you those tools. But what I do is I sit down every December and I go through the whole list of everybody in my family, and I ask what's their biggest risk, what's their biggest opportunity, and what could I do to help? And then I go to the tools and I look down through the tools, like, well, maybe what kind of a mentor would be useful to someone with this situation? And, we have a big Rolodex, don't we, Steve, at this point? And
absolutely.
And one of the best things we can sometimes do is point them to a friend that's an expert. So let's continue with that. Doug, if you don't mind, to talk a bit about this journey and your life and what you learned in not freaking out when your child chooses a different lifestyle.
Yeah. Oh, it was quite an experience, and I do recommend avoiding it if all possible. But the Lord didn't take us there. He instead, I think, felt like there must be a learning opportunity for us. So our daughter at 17 left the house and pretty much rebelled at everything that we cherished. She explored satanic worship and Buddhist worship and stolen cars, and was frankly pretty aggressive to us and the family. But we'll be eternally thankful to our mentor, who really helped my wife and I and family getting through it. And I think we all grew as a result. And after about a dozen years of learning and practicing unconditional love, I'm thankful to say she's now restored and home, and she has our 6-year-old granddaughter. And Lloyd, if you'll indulge me, I'll share a picture.
Sure.
We just went yesterday for her graduation from kindergarten, and I know it's just kindergarten, but hey. So
all right.
Wow,
that's our granddaughter, and that's her mom who took us on quite a prodigal journey. But I will have to say, she survived it, we survived it, and I'm sure we're better for it. I didn't have any gray hair before we started, so. But anyway.
Doug, I remember watching you learn to really lean into God's promises and to understand that we're responsible to our children, our adult children, but we're not responsible for them. And then to get on to your life, like Steve said about modeling, model a life that's attractive and compelling, and not just sit there at home wringing your hands because they don't measure up to your lifestyle expectations. What did you guys learn at the heart level in that painful experience?
Well, you had to learn what the most important priority is in your life and your families, and it brought us to our knees, and we maybe sought God a lot more than what we had been in the past, because you have no answers in that situation. There is no right answer. There's just the best answer at that moment. And I guess that was the biggest struggle for me as an engineer. I'm pretty binary, and there's there's precisely the answer that you should do. And in a case of a prodigal, you don't. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing right. There's just the best one. And we sought God to seek the right answers.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And it's such a joy. I know she's got a home now, and she's got her own home, and that's a wonderful story in its own. We'll cover that another day. But take us into the poll that you've created for us.
I will. So quickly, because we know it's the top of the hour, and we're going to move to the questions in just a moment. I see there's 2 there. And just know if you jump into the questions that we will answer your question whether you're there live or not. And you'll actually get an email with the answer. So pop your questions in, even if you have to run. So the poll that we have there, and we'd love to see how the audience thinks about this. What's your single greatest challenge when trying to guide your adult children? First answer is knowing how to be a consultant to our children and not interfere. Relating to them in ways that foster a loving relationship. Dealing with adult children whose lifestyle really doesn't align up to what yours has been. Adjusting to our new roles as empty nest parents while growing in our marriage. And finding an empty nest parenting model to help guide me through this phase. For me, that was actually the most important one. But for our audience, we're very strongly, our audience is saying, knowing how to be a consultant to our audience, to our adult children, and not interfere. Second to that, Steve, is dealing with adult children whose lifestyle doesn't align with yours. Those are tough. So, Steve, you think you could lead us into some perspective on those?
Yeah, I think, we've certainly talked about that first one quite a lot, but as it relates to being a consultant, I think the big thing, and Lloyd, I love the way you approached it with each one of your kids. We've talked about it as a family in a family meeting, is we've really talked about our role, or what we feel like our role to be at this stage of life with them. We've made it clear, I think, that we want to be a resource. We want to help them. God's blessed us. We want to be able to help them. We don't want to be the, we want to be joyful givers. So we don't want to always be the scrambling and gosh, we need help. Can you help us? Can you bail us out? Right? That takes some of the joy out of it. But I think a big part of it is just having that conversation, setting expectations, and importantly, as I said up front, being aligned with your spouse, because if you and your spouse aren't aligned in what that relationship's going to look like and how you're going to grow with them together, that can actually then create challenges between you and your spouse that you certainly want to avoid. But I think it really is about inviting them to leverage you as a resource, making sure they know that you love them, you support them, regardless of, again, their journey. And Doug, it sounds like you had to do that. Thankfully, again, our challenge came in high school, and our son early after high school went through this significant experience. Really, he would say he heard the audible voice of God spoke to him, and he was forever transformed in that. It sounds like yours might have come a little later, but you were down on your knees and you were praying. And so I think that's, we have to continue to live our lives. I think we have to be careful not to put our lives on hold. This relates to one of those other questions about how do we continue to grow our marriage in this phase. We've got to continue to live our lives. And my wife and I talk about living a life of adventure and maintaining the, we try to keep our marriage alive and fresh and feeling new, even though we've been married 32 years. And so those are just a few things that come to mind for me when I think about that question. I have a tendency to want to push, and I would just say be careful not to push, because in pushing, what you might do is push them away. Yeah. So don't push, be inviting, love them where they're at. Love them the way Jesus loves us. Lloyd, go ahead.
So Steve, we'll wrap up this first part of our time together, and then do some interactive Q&A with our friends. But each fall, you and I do a few weeks out at beautiful Scott River Lodge with 10 or 12 couples each week, just going deep over 5 or 6 days into this journey with your spouse about, building a great second half together with your family, building a thriving family. Talk a bit about that, and then Doug, take us into the questions.
Yeah, we're blessed to we've got 2 weeks scheduled, September 20th through 25th, and the 27th of September through October 2nd. Scott River Lodge is a beautiful place. It's an undistracted environment. Your cell phones, I don't know if I should say this or not say this, it scares some people, but your cell phones really won't work there. We do have some Wi-Fi, but it's just a great place to get away, to reconnect with your spouse, and to really engage in some thoughtful conversation around your second half. And, people ask me always, when is the best time? When's the right time to have that conversation? I would say in many ways, we started a little late. We attended a halftime program in 2012. It wasn't until 2017 that I engaged Lloyd as a coach, but we had really already begun a transition into halftime. And, in retrospect, I would have preferred to start that journey much earlier. So if these things, these questions, if the things we're talking about, if the things you've heard on other previous halftime webinars, if these things are piquing your interest, the time is now. And we just spend, typically the mornings will be a time of getting together and some teaching, and you'll hear from Lloyd and Linda, my wife and I. And then we try to provide a lot of time in the afternoons for rest and relaxation, some adventure if you're into that sort of thing. There's all kinds of various activities that you can do there. And then we spend some time, as you said, Lloyd, at night around the fire, and it's just a chance to connect and share stories and ideas and grow together. So would welcome you. And again, there'll be a link to some information, I believe, as a follow-up to this.
Cool. Well, thank you, Steve. So, Doug, what are some of our questions that we've got? And if you've got questions, slide them in there. Not that Steve or I or Doug are experts, but we really have had a lot of conversations around this.
All right. Our first question, Steve, comes from Roloff. And I don't know if I pronounced that well or not, but if I did not, my apologies. What do you do when your daughter often comes to dad for help or for answers instead of her husband? Because my dad is my hero and he can do anything. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm kind of envious.
Me too. My quick answer to that would be, and our daughter comes to us a lot. She comes to me, she comes to her mom, and we actually have had the conversation about the importance of her going to him. And not that, again, we don't want to help. We're here to help. But she does need to turn to him, and it's important for him as a leader of their family. It's important for him, and it's a way to honor him as her husband. So I would just say, we'll subtly push back sometimes when a question comes our way. It's, have you talked to Matt about that? Right? Even prior to them being married, because they've only been married a short time, just a few weeks. Have you talked to Matt about that? Have you and Matt talked through that? That's a great question, but I really think that's a Matt question. And so we certainly want them to know, both of our kids to know, again, that we're welcome. We welcome their questions. We welcome the opportunity to help, but their spouses need to be that first, outside of seeking God's wisdom, their spouses need to be their first connect.
And what other approach in addition is to come at the families, how we serve each other inside a family from a strengths-based perspective. And so the family, if your family knows each other's strengths, then you can lean on each other's strengths. And Carter's top strength is empathy and adaptability and learner and input. And so he's a scientist, student, and he really understands how you're feeling. It's amazing to see his empathy. And I had an empathetic thought once, and then I remember it went away, you know? And so, but I have strategy and futurist, right? So they laugh at me when they all came in one day and we had a big flip chart. I was working with Jenny, our littlest girl, on what she was going to do after college. And there was like a big flip chart up on the wall and we had all this stuff on it. And they were like, oh my, this little eye rolling goes on. But you know what? They come back and sit down and I can help them with that. But so the other side is, to say, well, to highlight the strengths of your son-in-law and daughter-in-law so that it counterbalances an area where they may not have had any experience. And they actually may not be able to help well with finance because maybe they had no experience in finance. And but the other side is maybe point them to an outside expert. So, we've said to our kids, hey, we'll pay for the Financial Freedom University. We'll help you get connected with the Ron Blue company so you can get Christian financial advisors. I think Edward Jones even has one Christian financial advisor that I've met once. That was a joke, Steve.
Yeah, we've got a bunch.
You got a lot. That's
yeah.
Right. So, that's like pointing them to somebody outside that can, so it's not just me or you.
Yeah. I would just add too, I think that, and we talked about this already, but you seeking their counsel. So I've already begun to seek the counsel of our son-in-law. He's an engineer. I'm not an engineer. So Doug, you would love him. But he's got a mind and he's got strengths, as you're alluding to, Lloyd. He's got strengths that I don't have. He's certainly got strengths that, my kids aren't blessed with. So in us going to him, and I think that also points our daughter to him. And helps her to recognize the resource that he is, that it doesn't always have to be going to mom and dad, that, she's really now in a stage where she needs to be going to him.
Well, what a great question. And they're starting to pour in here. So we will switch to the next one. Edwin asks, how might you encourage your adult son to grow closer in his walk with the Lord if you really feel he's not as strong in his faith maybe as he could be? You have any suggestions on perhaps one-on-one sessions or, finding things or approaches he might find agreeable?
Yeah, for us, we are blessed that both of our kids are following the Lord. And so I don't know that I can answer that specifically as it relates to their relationship with Christ. Certainly at times as they were growing up, they had questions and we had questions. I had questions. So I found that by sitting down with them and asking questions and resisting, again, the temptation to push our beliefs on them was critically important, and I would say still is. Lloyd, you might have more experience with that one, but for me, it comes back to that idea of just resisting the temptation to push, and just asking thoughtful questions, and again, loving them where they're at, going as far as they'll allow you to go, but not pushing, because you run the risk of pushing them away.
Yeah. And, each kid's unique. So their faith journey is different. And our middle daughter, Carolyn, who's a missionary in France with Campus Crusade, when she was 8 or 9, I would take her, I've taken our kids on a date every month, and I would take her on a date, just the two of us, to some fun restaurant that she loved. And I knew she was going to ask me a tough question. So I have a file sitting right over there. It says Carolyn's Tough Questions. And that's when she was 9, 10, 11. And, she would ask me, okay, but how do I know that when we get to heaven, God won't be mean? He could be mean, or how come God lets so much bad things happen, like the little girl in my 6th grade that got cancer? And so I had to deal with those when she was young. And I remember writing stories to try to illustrate apologetics in a child's language. And yet our son Carter went, to youth group, did just followed along with the Lord all the way through his PhD program. And then came back and said, I've got so much science that conflicts with my faith. I've got to figure out how to reconcile. He came into this same study here and sat down with me and said, Dad, I gotta sort this out. Now, his thinking is so far beyond my comprehension in terms of science that I couldn't be a resource. But I have a dear friend who's an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and he is a scientific apologist. That's his calling. He came through Halftime, and I coached him. That's what he wants to do. And it was so interesting because Tom came over here to spend time with Carter, and Tom came from the OR, and he had his scrubs on, and I said it was 8 o'clock, and I said, Tom, have you had anything to eat? And he said, no. And I said, well, look, here's the deal. I'm going to cook you the best meal I know how. And then you and Carter go in the back room and talk about faith. Well, I'm in there cooking, and I hear him out there saying, Carter, that's a great question. Way to go. Good question. Then they laugh, and then another question. And then he walked out the door, and I said, well, Carter, you guys just laughed. He said, yeah, that's a great guy. He didn't answer any one question. He just affirmed him for being on this journey. And then he asked permission if he could just send him something, an article from time to time that would deal with quarks and anti-quarks. I mean, I don't even know what quarks and anti-quarks are. But when you're deep into science and faith and you're trying to see how it jives, so, each kid's different, right? But I think the part about that is to just be engaged humbly, to be on our knees, and to be open to, so I asked Carter for permission to send him a book from time to time. I sent him 2 books that fit his journey. One was The Language of God by Francis Collins, who runs National Institutes of Health. And it's a science book about DNA and why God wrote your name in 20,000, you're in your DNA sequence. And then the Reason for God, which is a philosophical book by Tim Keller. Now, I went through 14 different books before I picked those 2, and I asked Cart for permission. But at the end of the day, the part I love is the end of the day, Carter's faith journey. He called his mom and said, hey, I've been reading like Habakkuk or something. He said, it just struck me. And I'm like, Habakkuk? There's nothing in there that could possibly be scientific apologetics. And it was just a reminder to us that this is a work of the Spirit of God. And to me, that's so comforting.
Yeah, and recognize, too, that it may take time. I remember Bruce saying that and really emphasizing the fact that it may not happen in the time frame that you'd like to see it happen. But again, you have to be careful not to push it. But it may take some time. And I love the ideas, Lloyd, about sharing resources, sharing the books, leveraging the relationships you have. Maybe it's not you, maybe it's somebody else within your network, your friend group.
My prodigal daughter asked to meet in a park because she wouldn't come home. And we were sitting across a picnic table, and she said, Dad, I've gone to a satanic worship, and I'm scheduled to go to a Buddhist. Of course, your mind rages at that point. What do you say? What do you think? And I remember a thought came to my mind, and I said, well, honey, I guess you're really going to learn what is truth.
Wow, that's a great question, Doug.
Well, I'd like to think I came up with it. I'm pretty sure I didn't. But it was very grounding because it wasn't confrontational. I think she hoped she could get a reaction out of me, which generally is pretty easy. And when I didn't react that way, I think it drew us more together than it might have had I reacted normally. Well, we have another question here. Edwin, that was a great question. Rolf has another good question. Have been issues between mom and daughter where the mom may be actually interfering and poor dad gets caught in the middle, and the wife then asks the dad to agree, don't you?
Yes, that happened a lot in the past. Thankfully, it happens a bit less now. And I would just take you back to that comment I made earlier about alignment and gaining clear expectation with your spouse, working through your roadmap together. One of the things we spend a lot of time on, right, Lloyd, at Scott River Lodge is just that. And so, there will still be those instances, but I think that gaining clarity as husband and wife around your role as a consultant and how you both view that as it relates to really every facet of being a consultant for our children, I think is just critically important. And there are still times where, I know, for example, our son is starting this business and we've invested in his business. And I was joking with some friends yesterday that, if it was up to my wife, she'd give our son our entire net worth. She'd be all in. And, we're certainly not doing that, but that's just her nature. She's a giver. And so talking about in advance some things that we might not have otherwise, the temptation might have just been to jump in and provide a response. We've been very intentional about pressing pause and saying, no, let's us get some agreement, and then let's have the conversation with the kids.
Yeah, and one way to start with alignment, and we work on this at Scott River Lodge, is what is your vision for your family? What are you aiming for? Do you just want successful kids? Do you want upstanding members of society? That's not what we're aiming for as a family. We're looking for a family that is following God because we know it's in their long-term best interest, and is loving and serving each other, knows their calling and is living it out, and they're effective at what they do. And so we're not trying to just build wealthy, successful kids in a financial perspective or career perspective. And so that helps us then with that long-term clarity. It helps Linda and I decide where to put our money, where to put our effort, what to applaud, what to just let go of. And our kids are going to have different levels of wealth. That's okay. And it's our job to just fit in. But I think if you don't have clarity and alignment along what your vision is for your family, the Bible says where there is no vision, the people perish. And I think where there's no vision, the family just drifts Absolutely. With the culture.
Yeah, we're getting ready. We do not have grandchildren yet. We're anticipating grandchildren at some point in the future and looking forward to that. But we're already talking about the realities of that and even our role there. And we've begun to talk about it a bit with our kids. Our kids do not live near us. So when we go to see them, we're either living with them in their small homes where they both live now, or we're living in a hotel room or our RV. And so even looking ahead to those significant life events and having conversation about our role, understanding what their expectations might be, in hopes of really avoiding some potential conflict down the road.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have one last question, but Rolf is full of really good ones today. And by the way, guys, a lot of good accolades there and there where folks are really appreciating your answers. So we appreciate that. So this might be our last one. How would you recommend seeking to better understand our adult children's relationships, especially those that are possibly approaching marriage?
So our daughter actually was engaged once to a young man, and I would say fine young man, but I didn't approach that in the right way. And I really, reflecting on that relationship, I think there was an opportunity to spend more time with her, asking questions, understanding where her head and her heart were, more time with him. And so fast forward, as she began into the relationship with the young man that she ultimately married here a few weeks ago, I was able to learn from that experience. So spent a lot of time with our daughter, just asking questions about their relationship. What is it that she loves about him? Tell us about it. What's his biggest fear? What's his most, his proudest moment? Talk about his relationship with his mom and dad. So I would say through asking questions, it really brought our daughter to a great place. There were things that I think through our time together, they were able to take into their marriage counseling and work through together as a couple. And I believe their relationship is it's just in a great place as they launch this new life together now. So that's kind of the way we approached it. It was just more intentional time, asking a lot of questions. I've used this a lot, but not pushing, because it's the man she's going to marry, not the man we're marrying. He's going to become a part of our family, but ultimately it's a decision that she needs to make.
And, Steve, that idea of counseling is also a way to help in their relational navigation. So one of the things we do is we paid for each couple as they get married to have 12 counseling sessions with a wonderful Christian counselor of their choice. We do a little of the homework because they're usually busy at that season of life. We do the research for them. Our daughter and son-in-law live in D.C. on Capitol Hill, so they need somebody that's right nearby. So we did the research. With their permission, we pay for 12 sessions up front, and then they just use them. And we just tell them about our experience with counseling, how, it helped us discover all the screw-ups that Linda had and how great a person I was. And that's a second joke, Steve.
Yeah.
And so we tell those stories, which the kids laugh at. And then, we just ask them, how's that going? And so Jenny said the last time, she said, well, we've had 4 of them. And she said, Dad, frankly, a lot of the conversation's about you. And I'm like, seriously? That can't possibly be. And sure enough, I mean, we can do our best at parenting and still end up with things that we didn't, or unintended consequences. And so I had to say to Chris and Jenny, like, what do I need to apologize for? Like, help me see, and they're like, no, it's nothing. It's just that you're a person with a big personality, a lot of energy and big goals. And you bought your first piece of land when you were 14 and that's weird. So, we have to deal with that. And so,
yeah.
I think there's so much, like you said, there's so much joy in this season. If we can kind of loosen our shoulders, commit to loving them extravagantly, put their interests ahead of our own, not push ourselves on them, journey the journey, not judge their journey, and then trust God that we're responsible to them, but not for them, and get on with their own life and really live a winsome life that they're just drawn to, right? And that's, I think, the big message you and I want to impart, and that we invite people to at Scott River Lodge.
Yeah. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say too, part of that asking questions of your son or daughter about their potential spouse, their significant other, you want to be able to love. We alluded to this earlier. I want to be able to love our son-in-law well. And one way for me to do that is to understand him. And so as that relationship was developing, by asking those questions, by getting her to talk about him and what it is she's taken by with him, it really put us in a place to better interact with him as first a friend, and then a boyfriend, and fiance, and now husband. So part of it is we want to love them well. This helps us to do that.
Well, it is pretty close to the bottom of the hour. But Steve, for those that might have popped in late, maybe they just wanted to ask you a question. Could you kind of summarize in just 1 or 2 sentences how you would advise somebody parenting as an empty nester?
Yeah. And Lloyd, you did a nice job of summarizing, I think, a moment ago. But I would say, again, be welcoming, You're there to be a resource. Avoid pushing, resisting the temptation to tell them what they should do, how they should do it. They're adults now. Again, love them where they're at. Love them the way Jesus loves us. And so those would be, ask questions. Just ask questions. Seek their counsel. Recognize them for the wisdom that they possess, the experience that they bring to the table. Those would be a handful of things that I would remind people of.
Wow. Steve, thank you so much. And thanks for your friendship. And Linda and I are really looking forward to the time with Diana. And I love it when we get those two beautiful ladies with their cowboy hats on, and we do the late night dancing. That's an awesome adventure together. And that's actually part of the joy of our second half, right?
Yes, absolutely. My wife is definitely my better half and the more fun half. So she was clearing the dance floor at our daughter's wedding. So she was having more fun, I think, than most everybody there.
Well, Steve, I thank you for your time. Lloyd, these are always so much fun to do together. And audience that has joined us, the Yumby, and I probably didn't do that one too well, and Siong, and Monica. Boy, I mean, we've just, Linda, so many people there, and so many nice thoughts, good food for thought on how to make our family thrive. Steve, this was just awesome. I just thank you for taking the time to do this, working it into your schedule, and I hope everybody can take advantage of this upcoming opportunity at JH Ranch.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.